back, I got the privilege to go to Africa, to Burkina Faso. And, I've seen poverty before. Grew up in Miami, and some of the areas there in Miami are very impoverished, and I've seen it, experienced it firsthand, but I've never seen poverty the way I did when I went to Africa. Complete and total devastation. You go from village to village, and when you arrive, the children they would run to us and just surround you. So we began to interact with these kids and to play games with them. And I always thought I was like really cool because the kids gathered around me because of my video camera. I thought it was me, but it was the video camera. And what we would do is, as we were playing with these kids, I would videotape them and I'd flip the screen around. And all of a sudden, they would just mob me and it didn't dawn on me, they had never seen their own reflection. There were no cameras, there were no mirrors in the village. So they were actually looking at themselves for the very first time. And they're making all these faces at my video camera, and they just gathered around us, so we just began to, just interact with them. We had a chance to hug on them. We brought them some grain to their village, and then I started playing this game where, and some of them, a lot of these kids in these villages and in these cultures, they really weren't human beings until they were way over the age of 18. So they didn't waste money on kids. So many of them had a shirt and that was it, or maybe a pair of pants and that was it, and the very little ones had nothing. And so it took a little while to get used to that. When I first got there, it was like, oh man, they don't have any clothes, their mouths are all crusty and their noses are crusty and there's bugs and they're dirty and they were just covered in the dirt. But the longer I was there, I stopped noticing the dirt. I stopped noticing the bugs. And I started hugging them. We started playing this little game where they would bend over and I'd touch their head. And then I'd bend over and let them touch my head. They were like, oh. And then I did it. And then they got in a line. Everybody wanted to touch the head. And I started taking the opportunity that each child that I touched, I said, Jesus, do a work in their life. Do a work in his life. And you know what? They're probably going, Father, help this man. They're touching my head. And you know what? All that interaction I had with those kids, and I never got one of the names. Never once did I ever find out what their names were. Until later on, I realized that I did know their names. And their name was Jesus. Their name was Jesus. I don't know what their parents named them, but in a very real way, when I was standing there interacting and loving them, they came to me and they were being Jesus. Now this is going to sound a little crazy, but stay with me. But St. Francis of Assisi believed that Jesus comes to us through the poor and the oppressed. He thought that the poor and the oppressed were actually sacramental, like baptism and communion. Because in those sacraments, Jesus comes to us. He wasn't saying that the poor in and of themselves are holy, but he believed that Jesus comes to us through the oppressed and the poor. Now, you may agree with that and may not fit in your theological box. But what is it that caused St. Francis of Assisi to feel this way? Well, I believe it's found in the text we're going to read. And since we don't have it on the screen today, you're going to have to actually use your Bible. So if you get, low-tech Sunday. So if you want to grab one nearby, or if you actually have paper in hand, or if you have the app on your phone, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 40. Matthew 25, verse 31 through 40. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world." Jesus said, "For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when do we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." And then later on in the text, he goes on to describe what happens when the goats do just the opposite. And he ends with saying, they will go away into eternal punishment. You want to know why? Because they refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters. He says, when you did that, you were refusing to help me. There was a boy and a little old lady that met by happenstance in a park. The boy was walking through the park, and he had just gotten out of his Sunday school class where his teacher had told the class that you can never tell when you're going to meet Jesus. So this is in his mind as he's walking home. And as he's walking through the park, he noticed an old woman sitting on a bench. She looked very lonely, so he sat down next to her. He said, "Hi." And then he offered her a piece of his candy bar, which he'd been saving. Well, she accepted the piece of chocolate with a smile. They talked for a while about nothing in particular, and then the boy offered her another piece of candy, which she gladly accepted. They talked a little while longer, and the boy got up to leave, and as he began to walk away, he turned around and he ran back to the bench, and he gave the woman a big hug. And she gave him a huge smile. When he arrived home, his mother saw a big smile on his face and said, "So what made you so happy today?" The boy said, "I shared my chocolate bar with Jesus. And guess what, Mom? She has a great smile." Meanwhile, the old woman returned to her little apartment, which she shared with her sister. The sister said, "You're all smiles today. What's up? What's made you so happy?" "Well, I was sitting in the park sharing a chocolate bar with Jesus. And you know what? He looks a lot younger than I expected." You never can tell when you're going to encounter Jesus. Tony Campolo once said, "Whenever you meet a suffering person, you will find that Jesus is there waiting to be loved in that individual." Whenever you meet someone who's going through a difficult time in their life, whenever you meet someone who is sick, whenever you help someone who is hurting, Jesus is there waiting to be loved in that individual. That is why Jesus said, "Whatever you do for one of the least of these, my brothers, you are doing it unto me." You cannot reach out to a person in need. You cannot embrace someone who is hurting. You cannot minister to someone who is in pain, who is in dire straits, without having that eerie and wonderful awareness that Jesus is coming back at you through that person. Because he's present in the hurting. Tony Campolo tells a story about walking down a street in Philadelphia, and a bum came up toward him. He says, I mean a dirty bum, filthy guy. He was covered with soot and mud from head to toe. You couldn't believe how messed up he was. He had a huge beard where there was rotten food all stuck in his beard. As he approached me, he held out a cup of coffee, and he said, hey, mister, you want some coffee? I looked at this dirty, filthy man and said, thanks, but I'm okay. And then as I walked by, the minute I passed him by, I knew I was doing the wrong thing. So he said, I turned around and said, excuse me, I actually would like some of that coffee. And so he took a sip of it, and then he said, sir, why are you being so generous? Why are you being so nice and generous today? The bums looked at him and said, because the coffee was especially good today, and I think when God gives you something good, you ought to share it with people. Wait, it ain't over yet. He said, I didn't know how to handle that. So he said, well, I've changed my mind. Is there something that I can give you? And of course, he knew at this point he was going to ask him for some money. And he said, how about a hug? So it said he reached his arms out, and he wrapped up this man, and he hugged him in the middle of the street. And he said it was at that moment he realized he was not hugging this dirty, filthy bum. He was hugging Jesus. If you study the Bible long enough, you will discover that God does not treat everyone equally. That's not a true statement. He does not treat everyone equally. In fact, he actually gives preference to the poor and to the hurting. God takes sides with the hurting. Most theologians would agree that God has a definite bias towards the poor. Let me give you a few scriptures that I found in Proverbs. Proverbs 19:17 says, if you help the poor, you are lending to the Lord, and he will repay you. Proverbs 14 says, anyone who oppresses the poor is insulting God. Proverbs 21:13 says, those who shut their ears to the cries of the poor will be ignored in their own time of need. Did you realize there are almost 2,000 verses in the Bible that call upon us to respond to the needs of the poor? 2,000. Say that with me. 2,000 scriptures that call upon us to respond to the poor. How did we miss this? Why was this so hard for us? When I asked that question, what is the most important thing to God? We had good answers, but how do we miss the poor? 2,000 times God refers to the way we respond to those around us who are hurting, and yet we miss it. We miss it. I believe if it's in the Bible 2,000 times, there must be something important that God has to say to us. In 1 John 3:17, it says, if anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need and has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? The answer is it can't. It can't. Another way to say it is, if I have no compassion on the poor, then I'm not a Christian because the love of God is not in me. Or if you're a Christian, then your heart is hardened toward God in this area. I think so often in our society we're so inundated that we even avoid the intersections in Greensboro where we know they're going to stand. And we rationalize it by saying, oh, he's scamming. And every time we drive through there, especially when my grandkids, which Madison kind of understands, she's expecting, if we have it, she's expecting me to call that man over. One day I took her to the store and she had some money and she wanted a bag of popcorn and a Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper. We give them that stuff before we send them home. But we had the Dr. Pepper, and so she got to the front and She wanted to pay for it. I said, no, your money's not good here, joking with her. And I paid for her stuff. And right on top of the can, sitting right there, it says March of Dimes. And Madison asked the lady, what's this for? And she said, oh, it's to help the children and the hurting. And she put all her money in the can. And I'm just like, yeah! Somebody's getting it around here. Based on what the Bible says about the poor, this is one of the ways to determine who the real Christians are. Do we help those around us in need? Usually when we talk about helping the poor, we get this idea that this is a painful, agonizing sacrifice. I think about it like this. When Mother Teresa woke up every morning, do you think that she had to drag herself out of bed? Do you think she said things like, oh, here we go again, another lousy day in Calcutta. These kids are annoying me. I hate this job. I can't wait to retire. It's Monday. I'm sleeping in. Can you imagine her saying that? I can't. She served tirelessly one of the most impoverished places in the world, and she considered it an honor. You want to know why? Because in her memoirs, every day she went into those villages, every day that she handled and held and loved and watched these children die of starvation, every time she locked eyes with them, she said, I saw Jesus. I saw the face of God. So let's bring it home to where we are, because I know how we think as American Christians when we talk about serving the poor. We usually have one of two responses. Our first response is, write a check. Write a check. When we see the hurting, we write a check. And if that is your first response, then you're missing what God is saying today. Should you support the poor financially? Absolutely. In a little while, we're going to invite you to go out in the lobby, and there's going to be packets on a table there from Compassion International, where we sponsor children. My wife and I have been sponsoring a child, is it 8 years now? And we've watched him grow from a little kid to a teenager. And we've seen him with his family. We've interacted with him. We write letters to him. He writes letters to us. We send him pictures. We send him Christmas gifts. We send him birthday gifts. In fact, who in here is sponsoring Compassion Child? Anybody? That's not enough. But that's awesome. But it's not just writing them a check, but it's actually getting involved in their lives. It's actually reaching out and getting to know this child. We got a letter from him where he said his little sister died. And so our hearts broke for him. That was like a part of our family. We get this idea that if we just write a check, that's enough. But it's a good thing. Listen, Jesus didn't say, for I was hungry and thirsty, and you should just write a check to Red Cross. Jesus didn't say, well, I needed clothes, so you can give some clothes to Goodwill. Jesus didn't say, I was sick, and you sent a check to the American Cancer Society. He didn't say, I was in prison, and you sent money to Prison Fellowship. That's not what he said. If you do that, we effectively shelter ourselves with our checkbook. And you never come in contact with the poor. You never get a chance to serve Jesus when he comes at you in the poor. So writing a check is awesome, but it's not enough. Financially supporting these ministries is a valuable thing, but it's not enough in and of itself. Jesus clearly is drawing our attention to how we interact with people that are in need around us. Do we take those opportunities to take a risk? The second response is more dangerous and worse than the first. And that is, I'm too busy. I'm just too busy. My job consumes my time. I'm making my future secure. After all, that's my responsibility. I don't have time for the poor. I'm already involved in ministry. I lead a small group. I'm an intercessor. I'm on the worship team. I teach a Bible study. So I'm busy. Or, well, there's kids' ball games and practice and dance recitals and school activities and plays and band. I just don't have time. You can't get blood from a turnip. Honestly, we've all been there. We all want the best for the kids. We've all got irons in the fire, but is that the right perspective to have? I was reffing a soccer game a few weeks ago, and at the beginning of the game, you check in all the players, and I called out this one player, and the coach said, he's not here, he's on a missions trip. Can you believe that? And I said, yes, I can. And I'm proud of it. Coach was like, whatever. Are we going to lose it? After all this game's like going to change the world. Right? God is calling us to sacrifice some things. Maybe show the kids that there are more important things in life than sports, band, and dance, or whatever. Are those things important? Yes. They are. Don't get me wrong. Maybe we need to spend some time teaching our kids how to help the poor. I was so proud of Madison when she dropped that money in that can. I didn't tell her to do that. I was actually kind of going, wait, you could. She just gave to the poor. Teach our kids the value of that. How to act like a real Christian. That is what will change their lives. It's not enough to say I care, or oh, that's so sad when you see someone suffering, or to feel sympathetic and say I will pray for you. Jesus says that's not enough. We've got to do something. Jesus says we've got to put feet to our feelings. In 1 John 3:18, it says, let us stop just saying we love people. That's too easy. Let us really love them and show it by our actions. Real love has actions with it. You might say, oh, I'm a compassionate person. Well, God would say, show me that you're a compassionate person. What are you doing to help suffering people? The Bible is so blunt and in our face about this, I don't know how we've missed it. Listen to what it says in James chapter 2. He says, suppose you see a brother or a sister who needs food or clothing, and you say, well, goodbye, God bless you, stay warm and eat well, but then you don't give that person any food or clothing. James says, what good does that do? Wow. In our text, Jesus says, here's how the kingdom of God operates. Those are the sheep. And then here's how the kingdom of the earth operates. Those are the goats. The sheep have the values of the Father, and the goats have the values of this world. And so Jesus comes to us in the form of the poor, and we have to choose which side we're going to wind up on. And the way he determines where we stand is based on how we treat the hungry, the thirsty, the homeless, the sick, the naked, those in prison. This morning, Jesus is coming to us, and he's asking each one of us a question. Which one are you? Are you a sheep or a goat? How are you going to treat the poor and the oppressed and the suffering will determine where you land. So based on this description, here's the acid test I want to put out there today. Consider your activities in the last month. Are you a sheep or a goat? How much time have you invested in helping the needy in the past month? It doesn't have to be huge stuff. It doesn't have to be, oh, now I got to feed the world. Or I got to take in every stray. Or I've got to... No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means we've got to do something. Matthew 10:24. Jesus says, those who give one of these little ones a cup of cold water because they are my followers will truly get their reward. My cup's empty. It's because I drank it all first service. It's simple things that you and I can do that if we're not careful, we'll miss those opportunities. I've missed them before. Thank God, the other day I was driving through town and this African-American woman was sitting in her car, and her hood was up, and I'm sitting at a stoplight, and I'm looking at her. She was on her cell phone, so I thought to myself, oh, she's got to take care of it. She's calling somebody, somebody's going to show up, and because the traffic's bad, if I pull over there, I'm going to be like a traffic jam, and then she might get hit by a car, and so my best bet would just keep going, and I'll pray for her. Yeah, that's a good idea. Because I really need to go straight. If I go left, then I'm going to get in the way of the traffic jam. And plus, she's got people. She's already calling her people. I don't want to interrupt her phone conversation. But I fought all of that, and I pulled over. And I got out of the car, and I go, and there's a little kid in the back. She just picked her up from school. She's like, hey, mister, and I said, what's wrong? She said, I can't get this started. It just won't do anything. And I'm the consummate mechanic. I know what I'm doing. Let's see what's under the hood. Yep, we got an engine up here. I didn't know what to do, so I'm looking around, and I saw the battery cable, and they were touching, and it was shorting out the battery. I'm like, oh, here we go. Tap on it. You gotta always tap on it. My dad said if it doesn't work, just bang on it. Tap on it. Boom, she started right up, and then it cut back off again. I said, here, let me try this. I told her, hold that. I said, boom, you got to start. I said, now don't let those touch. Now, I could have done, I'm finished. I said, I'll tell you what, I will follow you in my car and make sure you make it back to your house. So I got on the phone and said, honey, I'm just letting you know, I'm helping this lady, we're we're driving, I'm going to follow her home. And as she pulled in her driveway, I kind of drove up and said, everything okay? And she said, thank you so much. Now, I'm not tooting my horn. I promise you, I've missed opportunities many more times than I've probably taken. But those are some of the small ways that you and I can begin to see the needy around us. It doesn't mean that you have to sell all you have and go to Calcutta, unless God's telling you to do that. But it may just be simply giving a cold cup of water. Or if you've got money in your pocket and somebody needs it. Jesus says, if we give a suffering person a cup of water, that's where we start. You don't have to solve the world's problems or feed all the hungry people. But he does say that we need to do something. We need to help somebody. We need to find someone in need and help them, because you know what? When we help them, who are we helping? Who? Think about it. If every Christ follower just did that, if every one of us helped somebody, imagine all the millions of Christians on this planet. If all of us did something, what would that do? What would it do? It would change the world, wouldn't it? We would begin doing what God put us here to do to start, to be His hands and His feet. If you and I aren't doing something to help one of the least of these outside this church, then we are ignoring Jesus' command. I want you to watch this video and then we'll close in prayer.